Hi, I'm Chris Lee, and this is Virtually Speaking. Joining us today is Noah Wilson Rich, a Ph.D. in behavioral ecology, a viral TED speaker with millions of views, and a best-selling author. Noah founded the Best Bees Company, which has thousands of beehives for research on corporate campuses and rooftops nationwide, and partnerships with MIT, Harvard, TED, National Geographic, and NASA. He's also known as the beekeeper to the stars. Each client's beehive is a bioindicator for environmental health, acting as active data sources for NASA's studies on pollinator populations and climate change, Harvard's studies of pesticides in the environment, and National Geographic's reporting of pollinator habitat. As an academic scientist, Noah has held faculty appointments in biology at Tufts University and Northeastern University, and his research focuses on what's saving bees rather than solely on what's killing them. Using a custom-built digital platform to collect bee health data at scale, Noah makes an outsized impact on the larger mission to save the bees and helps clients understand the quantifiable impact they have on the environment by opening their rooftops to pollinators. Noah has been featured in the Wall Street Journal, the LA Times, Fox News, Fortune, Business Insider, and many more. So please join me now with your not-so-average bee guy, Noah Wilson Rich. Well, hello, Noah Wilson Rich. Thank you for joining me here on Virtually Speaking. How are you today, sir?
I'm doing great, Chris. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Thank you so much. I am so excited to have you here. I've been looking forward to this for a while now. And of
Me
course, we
too.
waited till the right moment
Yeah.
because this is April now, which is really Earth Month. Earth Day is coming up on April 22nd.
hmm
And I think it's okay to call this Earth Month. Are some people doing that?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's our 51st year of Earth Day, which some corporations and people around the world then extended to Earth Week so that there's room for events. And then that extended to Earth Month. So all of April, we're excited. Spring is arriving here in the Northern Hemisphere, and we're seeing all sorts of events pop up, including our conversation today.
Yeah, and what a great conversation this is going to be. You have spent, it seems like your entire life. I know it's not your entire life, but you have spent a big part of the last portion of your life on bees. And
hmm
we have this pandemic that is hopefully winding down, that we've as a world gone through together. But before the pandemic happened, a lot of people were talking about bees. The bees were dying. The bees are going away. What's happening to the bees? Why is this happening? What are we doing as human beings to cause this? How is this
Yeah.
impacting our carbon emissions, and how is this impacting our health? And
Yeah.
so it's really an incredible conversation. And I know that actually the solutions that you have for everybody, and the solutions that are being found out and that are out there, are actually ones that can help us survive better in a pandemic, make us healthier, and
Yeah.
also we can learn from the bees in a lot of ways as well. So tell me a little bit about the main question, which is, are the bees really dying?
Mm, absolutely. Yeah, it's crazy. So I know that bees, it's a weird topic for many people. However, when you dig a little bit deeper, everybody's got some sort of a story or connection to bees or beekeeping, or you know a beekeeper, or you like local honey, or you have some certain recipe that you know comes because bees pollinated those fruits and vegetables. This is a tie that binds around the whole world. There are bees and beekeepers everywhere. And Chris, when you look in the news and you see these headlines over and over, they're heavy and there's not much that we can do. And then for corporate leaders, when you see problems at work or times that require great institutional change and transformation, whether it's a pandemic or if it's any other thing that the world throws at us, there are times where we feel despondent and we feel like, what can we do?
Hmm.
And what I like to do, I've got a PhD in biology, I'm the CEO of a large company.
Hmm.
I like to look at bees as a tool for answers and even for inspiration. When we can look out our windows and look at the natural world and understand this planet has been around for billions of years. We've been around for a few dozen years as individuals. Maybe our companies have been around for longer, but the problems that we face, they're not that unique. They're really not. The world has seen pandemics, the world has seen behaviors that have to shift at a huge group level. And so bees are a tool to help us understand how to work through problems. They're, of course, also a pollinator that brings us food. There are 200,000 species of pollinators in the world. So
Wow.
those are butterflies and hummingbirds and bees, of course. Of those, 10% of them are bees. And so, of the bees, there's 20,000 of them. We can't possibly study all of them, but we do know that they are in crisis. We know this because humans have been working with honeybees for maybe even 15,000 years or so. Humans first domesticated honeybees in Egypt when they floated bees down the Nile River to pollinate crops as they started to
So
become
they did that on purpose?
on purpose, because we understood that when you see a flower exists because of the oldest love story that has ever existed in time, when pollinators started to meet flowers, and flowers help plants reproduce because they pass off, we're going to get a little deep now, they pass off sperm from plants, which is pollen, to bees, and then bees will transport that sperm to another flower and then impregnate it to give birth to a baby fruit.
So
That's what.
15,000 years ago, human
Yeah.
beings understood that and moved the bees down the river in order to get their plants to grow better.
Yeah, so we started to see evidence from cave drawings in places like Spain from 9,000 to 15,000 years ago. And so we see that there's some evidence of honey hunters. My point here is we
Wow.
have a very long history with honeybees. And because of that, we're really able to understand when they're dying off or when they're thriving, when a beekeeper's bees are not making much honey or when it's plentiful, when crops are failing, like the almond industry requires 100% honeybee pollination. Every crunchy almond that you have, I know you're in California where most of our almonds are produced, that's because a honeybee touched that almond blossom. And so when honeybees are dying, as they are now, the availability of almonds can go down. The price of them, due to supply and demand economics, goes up, and that
Right.
threatens our nation's food supply. So, for my research and for my lectures and my keynotes, I partner up with some key groups like NASA and MIT to better understand the impacts on our food system as it relates to bees. When we're thinking about keynotes and talking about how bees can teach us important lessons, I like to go beyond just the talk so we can learn about how bees have really complicated group dynamics, how their communication systems allows even just one little worker to speak up in a way. A honeybee worker dances. The Nobel Prize winning dance communication language of bees is something I'm not going to do for you right now, Chris, but maybe on stage one day I'll show you how a bee does the waggle dance. But in that example, for where one worker can drive group change and how that one worker relates to a leader in a beehive, let's say the queen bee, that dynamic is so important to understand for leaders who are working through any types of change these
Mhm.
days. Thinking, well, what has nature solved? Any group that didn't survive over natural time went extinct. So we don't want to see that happen to companies. But
Right.
going beyond this discussion, companies are more and more today getting beehives because we do understand that bees are dying.
Yeah.
And if we just left the beehives dead, we wouldn't be making any progress here. And I'll say one last thing on this, Chris. Over the past couple of years, more bees die in the United States on a warm summer day than do on a cold winter day.
Hmm.
So this is because of at least four things. Bees are inflicted with many diseases, pesticides, habitat loss. So there aren't enough flowers out there. So like green rooftops are very helpful. We can talk
Mhm.
about that later. And
Yep.
then with climate change, we can talk about that as well. So a lot of different problems out there, a lot of ways that everybody can help solve this. And this is part of my life's work, tying this all together.
Yeah, it's amazing what you've done with your company and with all of your research. Um, Certainly, there's a lot to take in there. But one of the things I'm reminded of is when I heard Bill Gates talking about, the pandemic that's coming. He said that 3, 4 years ago. I remember seeing those comments and the video of him saying that and saying to myself, well, we'll never let that happen. We as human beings will, in America, we'll never let that happen for sure, but we'll mitigate that, and we'll fix it before it happens. And so it reminds me of this conversation with the bees as well. Like, oh, the bees are dying, but we'll fix that. There's great people like Noah out there who are doing great work to stop that from happening. I live in Los Angeles. There's tons of flowers everywhere. There seems to be bees all the time everywhere, and butterflies, as you mentioned, everywhere. So I'm feeling pretty good about where I live, and maybe the bees aren't dying, here, or maybe in America, maybe it's somewhere else. Everybody wants to pass the buck.
Yeah, it's amazing, Chris. So you think about risk mitigation, and that could never happen. Thinking about the world's great thinkers and thought leaders like Bill Gates making plans that just did not work out this time. Think about great leaders like Jamie Dimon. One of the things I love about how he runs JP Morgan Chase is that he really focuses on risk mitigation, and he makes plans for what could happen with any different scenario so that there's a playbook for this. And so this is so important for leaders today, especially those like you're saying who are thinking, oh, that couldn't happen. We're planning for that. Well, think it through. And this is why investors are making more demands for ESG and CSR goals, to break down the acronyms. So environmental, social, governance, and sustainable governance roles and goals. And we're thinking about corporate social responsibility, the ways that corporate leaders can actually make an impact here that goes beyond the talk. When we're thinking about places like where you're at in Los Angeles, yeah, it's so beautiful, and the bees and the butterflies are chirping. It's this amazing oasis. And yet the law in Los Angeles had bees illegal. Bees were not allowed to live there, despite that's where they're doing great, until 2015, where, in part of a large community effort, it was a bipartisan rule change, 15-0, with the LA City Council, Republicans and Democrats all coming together to say, we've got to legalize pollinators, legalize beekeeping.
How are they illegal?
In the 1870s, people saw bees on their orange grove trees. It was very agricultural back then, and thought that those pollinators are stealing our food. And so because people didn't understand food systems, just like our conversation today, for those viewers who are thinking, okay, these guys are talking about bees, like what is the point here? Well, we don't understand things, and then we make decisions based on either wrong information or just taking it for granted. Those have implications that can last for hundreds of years. So that simple rule to make bees illegal, thinking pollinators steal food, stayed on the books until 2015. It's such a problem because bees are dying everywhere except for LA.
Well,
And so
were people arresting bees? I mean, how did they enforce that? What did that
we're
mean?
kicking beekeepers out.
Ah,
I wrote a book with Princeton University Press about bees. They sent me on a national speaking tour, which started in Los Angeles, and they wanted my talk to be about beekeeping in LA. This was in 2014. And I said, well, maybe you should hire an LA beekeeper for that. That was before the Best Bees Company went national and expanded to LA. And so I did some investigative journalism. I arrived a week before my talk, and I started to meet with beekeepers and look online. And everybody said, you can't come around here asking about this. I met with companies that had rooftop beehives, restaurants, so they had fresh honey in their restaurants and bars. And they said, you have to leave the premises, or you cannot be asking these questions. Beekeeping in LA is so underground. We'll get in so much trouble. One
wow.
kid in Beverly Hills said, do you know how much trouble it was to get a wine license just from our neighbors here? God, we're not even going to the bees. So by talking about this, it allows for education. It allows for people to do it safely. And importantly, it connects companies with a way to transform their rooftops from what we call gray to green. What are companies doing with their underutilized resources on the rooftops? It
Right.
can be amenity decks. Green roofs reduce the operating cost of buildings. Having pollinator habitats there in apartment buildings allows for families to grow carrots on the rooftop. It allows for a more desirable place to work and live when those real estate companies are using green practices. And we're also seeing companies that have an increasingly millennial workforce that
Yeah.
place demands on their leaders for greener, more sustainable practices. So this is all inevitable. It's stuff that we know is happening. And that's
Right.
why I think it's so important to start talking about it now.
Yeah, so a lot of things again to unpack there. And one of the things is, I've seen these drawings, I've seen these renderings of the future cities. I've seen how it looks to me like plants will be growing all over buildings and on all the rooftops, because human beings will be smarter. They will be doing better to take care of themselves and the environment. So I've heard you talk about how bees can actually do better, and actually maybe do better in cities than you might think. So tell us a little bit about that, and
Yeah.
then circle back to what you were talking about, which is that beekeepers are what you were really talking about with the illegalities. And
Mm,
that the fact is we need more beekeepers. And
absolutely.
having a beehive in your backyard or on your company premises or rooftop or campus is something to really think about. So tell us
Yeah.
the whys and hows on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first talk I gave on the TED stage was about urban beekeeping. And this is something that I was doing every day. Didn't realize that it would be so interesting to others. So I just shared some data that we had from beehives that were in cities compared to the suburbs and rural areas. My research, yes, while it looks at why bees are dying, it really focuses on the flip side, the positive side. Why are surviving pollinators living and where are they doing so? And what can leaders, whether it's a homeowner or a company executive, do to really make a difference, to move the needle on the environment for biodiversity? What we found was that bees are doing better in urban areas, and they're doing better the higher up we go. So those empty rooftops, while everybody I know can agree that we are not going to have these as empty forever. When you look out over New York City and we see all of this gray space, really in any city, we know that's going to change. We also see with the Paris Climate Accord, where we have a goal for reducing the temperature increase by 1.5 degrees Celsius. For green rooftops alone, we can achieve that and even go beyond it for as
What
much
about
as
solar panels? Are bees going to be competing with solar panels on roofs?
so they don't compete at all. What's under a solar panel? It's nothing. Put a beehive there. We call it pollinator habitat. So we work with the solar industry so that we have pollinator habitats there, and there are already 8 states that now require solar farms to have pollinator habitat.
Wow.
The shade underneath a solar panel actually allows for more moisture there, and it can allow for more plants to grow because the land doesn't dry up as much.
And you said they're better higher up. So, like on a 20, 30, 40-story building, you can even higher than that. So,
Yeah, the
bees have no
highest we had,
problem
like the
flying all the way up to the top of a building like that.
That's right. Yeah. So over 70 floors in New York City, we've got beehives. Chicago, again, it's empty space and it can't be used that way much longer. Buildings with green rooftops and pollinator habitat have lower cost for their heating, their HVAC, their insulation. We're seeing trends in buying for millennials. As I mentioned, they want to live and work in more sustainable places. That was with Forbes magazine. We are also looking at companies that are commonly saying they've got net zero carbon goals. Carbon sequestration is such an important part of this current day and age. All companies have to say something about this because of investor demands, because of worker demands, and because of client demands. And a lot of companies don't know how to do it yet. And so that's really where I can come in. When we look at a beehive as a data tool, a data factory, or what we call it, a barometer of ecosystem health, we get information from the beehive that also can be shared. When everybody gets a little jar of honey that has a custom label on it and a QR code, that can then connect people to a company's website that says all of their ESG goals. But what we're looking at is how plants pull carbon out of the environment. About 50% of the carbon that we put out there as humans for greenhouse gases is taken back in from plants.
Okay.
The other half is from oceans.
So, you're saying that the data from the beehives is telling us how the plants in the area are doing and what
Absolutely.
plants we might need to plant more of, or how does that make us healthy as well? Tell us a little bit.
Yeah, so this is a great example for how we can take inspiration from nature and also get some education from this too. There's so many cutting edge technologies that I work on with my awesome students at MIT, with our collaborators at NASA, and with Best Bees. We're doing technologies that I'm sure people have heard a lot about, but they don't really know what it is. And it's so important that everybody gets caught up to speed because it's the modern world. Otherwise, you're going to get left behind. So when we look at a beehive, when we look at the honey that we mentioned, when every organization's employees and customers get to share in some of that local rooftop honey, what my team has developed is a tool that uses genomics technology. So with genomics, we look at all the plant DNA in honey, and it tells us all of the plants that the bees are going to pollinate. What that means is, of course, we know now what our honey tastes like. So you can kind of taste that science and
Hmm.
engage with the sustainability in a way that other programs kind of fall short on. Windmills, solar panels, there's great talking points, but they're not really exciting or engaging. So having some honey, understanding that this is giving us our bee and biodiversity report. We have a full list of all of the plant biodiversity that having our rooftop beehives at our company allowed us to promote. So for example, in Boston, 411 different different plants are pollinated by honeybees. That allows a company and their reporting to include in their biodiversity report everything that they've contributed to with just a little box of rooftop pollinators in an otherwise empty space. I'll just add some other technological ways that we're using bees to advance companies and how they can connect with science. There are aspects of artificial intelligence and machine learning where we do data sensors within a beehive that can then connect with stakeholders, with employees, to understand how their bees are doing, how much honey is being made there. If a beehive is exposed to pesticides, through learning as a computer itself, it could potentially close its entrance up to protect the bees. And that's one of the ways that through technology we can save the bees. We are also looking at things like blockchain. So we're able to connect all of the beehives across different properties. Let's say there's a large company nationwide, like Beacon Capital Partners is a wonderful partner of ours. They've
Hmm.
got properties and skyscrapers in 11 cities now. All of their beehives are connected within a network. And that's a way that over time we start to be able to build up pieces of information that tell us in a very honest way how healthy the bees are. Sometimes when we get reports from the government or we're having conversations about bee health, we don't really know what's accurate, what's not. What do we make of a headline story? And one of the things that Whoopi Goldberg, one of our amazing clients, and I connect on is how do we trust the headlines? How do we know if we're making a difference? And so, with this ability to have our own network of beehives with information that we're collecting and sharing, whether it's with our stakeholders, or investors or employees, it's a way that we're starting to build some more faith in systems. And so blockchain technology allows us to develop our own system that's very honest and unhackable. And we start to use this term in a way that people get familiar with, and that helps advance organizations in starting to play around with a little box of pollinators to practice what these different technologies are.
Okay, so this is amazing. So there's three things I want to talk about. One is the honey, one is the beehive, and one are the plants.
Mhm.
So the plants we can plant in our neighborhoods to make the bees healthier
Mm.
and to make the bees reproduce more and have healthier beehives, right? We also need to make more beehives so that there's more bees and they have better places to go and pollinate and bring the make the honey. And then the honey is good for us humans to have, not only to analyze it and how healthy the plants are in the area and how healthy the bees are, but also it helps us become more healthy because it's a very healthy thing to eat. It also can help with our allergies because of the local pollen. It'll make us a little bit more immune to our local pollen. Is that all correct?
Yeah, that really is. I mean, when we think about health and wellness, we think about a term called biophilia. Have you heard that before?
No.
So this is something that the U.S. Green Building Council is really advancing. They have accreditation programs called LEED for green buildings, and then CITES, which
Hmm.
is an acronym that also looks at the areas around buildings, the
Okay.
relationship that companies and buildings have with communities. Biophilia is a way that we can increase our health and wellness by being exposed to nature. So whether that's a deck or a green rooftop or just an area to sit outside and have a meeting, with an employee-employer relationship,
Right.
when we're exposed to nature, when we're sharing honey and building community and culture around that, it really helps the well-being of an organization. And when everybody's feeling well and coming together, whether it's, because somebody has allergies or they're just not feeling well, there are a lot of ways that bee products help improve human health. But when you can talk about that in a way that's engaging with everybody, whether it's a name the queen contest or a honey bake off, or if it's having a say in what we want to see planted. So, God forbid, there's an edible habitat around a building. This is something that EMD Serono division of Merck is doing around the world. They have nature paths, and you can sit by the beehives and you can listen to kind of their hum. And Harvard Business School is the same thing on their rooftop through a glass window. They have groups that will sit around the beehive and look at that teamwork example in nature for that inspiration and that biophilic health and wellness benefit so that the teams are more productive and they're starting their training at HBS in this really advanced way that already naturalizes our future business leaders with modern day technology and using bees.
That's amazing. So, wow. So let me ask you this. If you had carte blanche, if you had, the president of the United States or the governors of all the states in front of you, and they said, what do we need to do? we want to save the bees and we want to have more plants, we want to have more pollinators, what would you say would be the answer? Put beehives everywhere on all the roofs and plant the plants that we know are the ones that the bees like in those particular environments?
Yes, but
And that would
connect.
save the bees?
Well, yes, it would, because bees are dying. And if we just let the dead bees lie, then what are we doing? We've got to replace them. We've got to breed a better bee, so to speak. So, part of what we do at the Best Bees Company is with all of our clients, those beehives are for our research. That's why our clients keep all the honey. We're in it to understand where bees are healthy and where they're dying. We use maps, that's our partnership with NASA. And we understand the factors around that. You need to connect everything with science. It doesn't have to just be the bees, but there's another term for cutting edge technology called the Internet of Things. Have you heard of that one yet?
Yeah,
Yeah. So why don't we get a text message from our turkey when it's in the oven on Thanksgiving that tells us when it's done? You
right.
know, why doesn't our refrigerator, for everybody, some people, but text us when our milk is spoiled? And why doesn't it start to learn, a refrigerator, to know, oh, it looks like you just added some milk and you're going to set a timer because that's going to go bad in a few days, type of thing? There are so many ways that connecting everything to science or the
Got it.
Internet of Things can improve our quality of life, and it can improve business performance, and it can provide inspiration for teams to work better. And so when I'm saying, yeah, put a beehive everywhere, what I really mean is that when it's connected to science, it's going to give us information about what plants are in an area. We can think about how to be more resilient against natural disasters. So we've looked at places like where there are wildfires in Australia and California, or where Hurricane Maria struck Puerto Rico. When we have data sets that show what plants were already there, then we know what we lost in times of disaster.
Mm.
And those are becoming much more frequent with climate change. And so that's what's going to be so important. We've got to get beehives. If I had carte blanche, one thing I'm already doing with the federal government is telling them we've got to add science to this. You can't just, with your landscaping team, plant what you want to plant. For governments, when you have to take down a tree, think about what pollinator tree you can put in its place that's particular for your own local area, that's native. We've got to inform all of our practices through science in order to become our best society.
So people who are planting plants on their campuses, their schools, the universities, but also the big corporations that have campuses, they can literally plant the perfect biodiverse, garden and landscape.
Absolutely. If it's done by science, then you can also put that in a report, your biodiversity report, and you tell your investors and your stakeholders, here's what we're doing. And you
Right.
do in a way that doesn't require the burden to be placed on the employee, who's probably not a scientist, but they're an amazing person who can do a good report. But you need some numbers, otherwise it's all talk. And so the point here, Chris, and really the value that I'm trying to add to the world, is how do we go beyond the talk? Whenever I give a keynote, I
Right.
love to pair it up with actually getting beehives so that the teams can then look at that and understand the symbolic resonance of that. We're getting data from that, using genomics about the plants. We're understanding how we can share the honey with the whole team. We're getting lessons in leadership from the beehive, through waggle dancing and group communication. And there's a lot more good that can be done. But right now, we're still stuck in a period where it's a bit scandalous to get a green rooftop.
Yeah.
We can't grow carrots on the roof. This is the biggest problem. So this I know we can achieve, and I'm comfortable being in this space because it's very fun being a CEO at the forefront of an emerging technology, an emerging
Yeah.
solution, pollinator habitats, with a for-profit business model. There's no reason why environmental leadership needs to be at odds with profit. We can do this all together.
Yeah, it seems like this is really, again, another industry or another technology that's out there that is going to be very prevalent in the future that really people don't know about. They're scared of. They don't want to do it because they don't believe in it. But it's
Yeah,
something that 10 years down the line, it's going to be very, very popular. I would guess,
absolutely.
especially in the new buildings they're building as well, because I've seen those renderings, like I said before, where they have the walls of green and there's like gardens incorporated into the apartment buildings that are being built all over the world.
I mean, who wouldn't want that? And
Right,
also see this as that it's inevitable. So any technology that we know is coming,
right,
that's where it's fun for business leaders to be at the forefront.
right.
Going back to how we started this conversation, Chris, everybody knows what a bee is. It's not like a T-Rex. People think that a lot of things are bees, like hornets and wasps and yellow jackets. Those are not bees.
Murder hornets.
Yeah, murder hornets. I mean, not a bee. So
Right.
bees are vegan, they're safe, they're already in the environment, and everybody has some sort of a story or likes honey, so people can relate to it. But by changing everybody's perspective and understanding that there's so much inspiration that can be had there, that it's relatable, and it's an opportunity for us to get familiar with technologies so that it reduces the barrier of companies to achieve these things through a little box of bugs. I mean, it's a very low investment for a high impact.
Yeah. So this is amazing stuff, and there's a lot of different pieces of it and parts to it that are very interesting. But bottom line, are the bees going to recover? Are we as humans going to be the ones who have to save the bees? Are they going to save themselves? Are you noticing any good trends right now since the pandemic? Maybe there's less people out there, so there's more nature happening. Tell us a little bit about the future of
Yeah.
bees.
So bees are not doing well. And here's why this matters so much. It's not about honeybees. And again, getting a beehive at an empty rooftop or at a corporation, it's not about the bees. It's about what the bees indicate. So honeybees are an indicator species because they tell us how the rest of the ecosystem is doing.
Ah,
They're giving us data about biodiversity. So if we have a snapshot in time from a honey harvest and from genomics with honey DNA, as we call it, if it tells us you have 400 plant species, and then when we do our next sample from a next honey harvest, it says you have 350 plant species and then 300. We know what we've lost in a way that we've never measured before.
ah,
So these are snapshots in time that we're getting. If we see a honeybee hive that is not doing well, we can make an inference that other bee species, again, there's 20,000 of them and 200,000 species of pollinators that we can't all study at the same time. So the things we learn about honeybees give us inferences about how the rest of the pollinators are doing. And so if bees are dying off, then we know this is a bigger problem out there. And we've heard this term as the insect apocalypse. I mean, nobody wants, bugs creeping and crawling all around. I get that, but they play a hugely important ecological role, especially when we're thinking about goals that relate to carbon sequestration, net zero. We talked about how 50% of the greenhouse gases that are put out there return to the earth and the soils through plants. 80% of those plants are flowering, meaning pollinators are required. So anything we can do to help one pollinator, like getting a beehive manually, we know that that's also going to help get more plants out there, that's going to feed other pollinators, and that's going to take out a huge amount of 40% of the carbon that we put up there
right,
by getting a little box of pollinators. So it really does require everybody's effort, and corporations have the most power here because they have the most rooftop space and they've got the most resources and they have the most demands put on them by stakeholders to do something. So this
right,
is really, I would say, the easiest thing that one could do by getting beehives on campus.
right. That's amazing. So there any trends that are trending upwards, that are trending in a positive way, that you're seeing at all, as far as, is anything changing? Is it getting worse? What's kind of the end game here if nothing changes?
It really is getting worse. I mean, with the Trump administration, they really delayed putting bees onto the endangered species list for the first time ever. They eventually were. They put bee killing pesticides back onto the market. And it's been really challenging to find some headway here. And this is why I think it's important to get around the politics, because then when you think about Barack Obama got bees at the White House, Donald Trump kept them, and then Mike Pence added bees to the Naval Observatory. This really is a bipartisan issue that comes down to feeding the next generation. Do we want our kids to have healthy fruits and vegetables? Everybody can agree on this. So it's taken a long time. And what gives me hope is really seeing corporations that are doing this action. They're doing something really because investors are demanding it and they need
Right,
some help with reporting. And that's really where the Best Bees Company comes in. So it starts here with the keynote. It starts just like in a beehive with getting a message to a worker bee and building enthusiasm where people can look at a beehive and take some sort of inspiration, enjoyment in the honey, sharing it with family and friends and colleagues, and then thinking a little bit deeper as I get into with my TED
right,
Talk. what that means. And the importance there is that if we don't do it, who will? We're only on this planet, Chris, for such a short amount of time. And if we're not going to do this, it's not going to happen. And everything's going to keep dying off. And that's really going to prevent the next generation from having healthy food. So this is how to solve it all. Get a beehive, save the world. I promise you.
That's amazing. Well, I love your passion, and I'm hoping there's a lot of other guys like you out there and gals who are working towards this goal and doing the research and following the trends and making sure that we're heading in the right direction. And certainly, I think, like you said, this is a time in history where we as human beings are looking inward more than ever, looking at what we've done to create our environment and what we're doing to each other
Mhm.
and what we can do, taking some responsibility and what we can do to better our environment and better our communities and better ourselves. So you're one of those guys leading that charge, and I hope that this is the most successful, Earth Day in history, where more people are engaged and doing something than ever before because of people like you.
Well, thanks, Chris, and I appreciate this opportunity so much. And I want to share with people just one more note about how leadership lessons from the beehive can really help us understand that yes, we know that we've got this burden to do more for Earth Month, and then of course for the other months as well. But how does it happen in a way that feels good for the whole team? It's really difficult when there's a top down directive for a corporation to do more. And it can be difficult even for homeowners, whether you're working from home during the pandemic or you're just dealing with a family where it's an accomplishment if you got your kids to brush your teeth that day. I know you've got kids at home, and all of these different levels really come down to groups and group dynamics. And that's what a honeybee hive is so perfect at. They've been around for 100 million years.
Yeah.
And so nature has really almost perfected, not perfect, but really selected for particular problems that were solved in a way that these large successful groups did. So as humans, it's hard to set ourselves apart. But when we look at bees, even ants, termites, other group living organisms, snapping shrimp is one, aspen trees, naked mole rats. I mean, these are weird, bizarre things in nature that most people have never heard of, but those are all examples of what we call a superorganism. And that's where natural selection over evolutionary time has favored groups where the individual really doesn't survive very long. Maybe in a way to a corporation where if you just pull one worker out, I don't think that worker can do the work of the whole business.
Right.
So organizations, whether it's the family, whether it's the company, whether it's just us in society, we really need one another. And so we
Yeah.
can take these lessons from nature to understand how they work together. And in a beehive, where they've got to do a group decision, sometimes they have to move to a new home. That new home is found because one worker bee shifted her task. It's a female dominated society. And so it's always she did something. You see a bee at a flower, say, hey, girl. So that bee from a flower said, I'm going to go look for a home now. She kind of surprised herself. And so she changed up her task. So that's kind of one step. If an individual at a company is thinking, well, how can I make a difference? Surprise yourself. Get out of that regular schedule and say, I'm going to think about something a little bit differently today. And then with that worker bee, when she finds a good home, like a hole in a tree, she comes back and with enthusiasm, she dances to communicate to all the other workers, hey, guess what I found? You've got to pay attention to me. Listen to me. I found something and I need you to know about it. So for a bee, she dances, she waggles her butt. It's called the waggle dance and kind of a figure eight motion. It's pretty cool. Again, I'll dance for you on stage.
Please.
Yeah, the keynote stage. So she waggles to communicate and she's doing it enthusiastically. And because of that enthusiasm, Chris, that's what gets the other bees to pay attention to her.
Right.
Because like, shut up. We're busy. We've got jobs to do. But when you've got enthusiasm, people notice. And they notice if you have information. And what's amazing here with the beehive is that then those other bees go to confirm. And that's something with the business organization too. If somebody has something to say, I've got an idea, let's get beehives on campus. If you share that with enthusiasm, your
Yeah.
coworkers will hear you and then they'll go to validate you. They'll want to do some fact checking or think like, is that safe? How do we look into those resources in the same way that a beehive does? What's amazing here, Chris, is that when those other bees validate the information from the one bee that found a new home, They then do this with 100% accuracy. If they go on to continue that message, just like somebody at an office says, let's get bees, if they're going to continue with that recommendation, bees have a system where they're always accurate. It's good information. Otherwise, they'll say, it's not right. Go dance somewhere else. We're not going to listen to you. Go buzz off.
Go buzz off.
Yeah, so she recruits, gets more people on board, and then it really starts to get loud with enthusiasm. People are talking, or bees are buzzing here. And so with a beehive threshold, it's 5% of bees it takes of the whole group to make a decision. So that's something that's a unique threshold for bees. And recently I've come to learn what that threshold is for humans. Do you know what that is? Chris, how many people in a group does it take to drive change for the organization? What percentage? You want to guess?
I would say probably 5%.
25%.
Oh, wow.
So this is from Shankar Vedantam did a podcast, I believe, called Hidden Brain and the Snowball Effect. Once you get how many to recruit, you have to get about 25% in your group to recruit to drive behavioral change, whether it's politics and any sort of movement. Once you have that critical threshold, then the rest of the group pays attention. If you're at 24%, people are like, you're just like a weird fringe thing. You know?
Right.
The coalition for 25% in humans, 5% with bees, they're much more evolved, much more derived than we are. And then in doing so, they have a whole sequence of events that leads to a consensus. They have these runners on the rest of the beehive that say, hey, there's a message to be spread. Something's happening. Listen up.
Right.
Kind of like an email. There's going to be a meeting. Right? Just listen up. Everybody listen. And then at that meeting with the bees, they'll say, we're going to do a move. And really that gets the temperature up. And the rest of the bees, 95%, don't know what's happening, but they just know to get their temperature up.
They follow.
And those 5%, they're the leaders. So they're called streakers, but they just guide the rest of the population. And they kind of say, trust me, don't worry about the details. We're just going here now. In a way where for human corporations, if you've got an individual worker who wants to drive behavioral change for the group, recruit up to 25%, tell the other 75%, hey, trust us. You don't have to understand everything, but just trust this group that we're doing something good here, and our whole group prepare for the change and then go over here and then settle in. So it's a whole process that can give us education and inspiration for how anybody in an organization can do this. Sometimes workers feel like they're helpless, especially in today's world. But what's key, and the last thing I'll add here, Chris, is that for the leaders, like the queen bee, she is not really in charge, just like maybe a CEO like myself sometimes might feel. That corner office needs to be there, just like the queen bee lets off a pheromone, a scent, so everybody knows that she's there, just like my team needs to know a CEO exists. But then they make their own decisions too. And so the presence or absence of a leader is really what makes sense there, but the group dynamics are much largely more powered by workers than those workers might actually realize.
Right. That's amazing. And really all of this is, again, about this idea of looking inward and contributing, and not just kind of doing the work and doing things as we always have, but thinking about our responsibility and what we can do to get us all on a better track, whether it be an idea that somebody has that we should look at, but also looking at some of the causes and some of the things that are out there right now that people are pointing at and making known as an important thing to them, but also to our humanity. I mean, there's so many people pointing to the oceans and pointing to soil and pointing to pollution and everything else that we're doing that we can actually change if we just look at it a little bit differently and take some responsibility.
Yeah, we just have to shift our perspective. We have to feel empowered to know that we do have a say in something. We just might not know how to do it. And that's why by looking at nature for groups that have been around for millions of years longer than us, they give solutions to how we could do it. So let's say everything I just shared with bees isn't it. Go to ants next. Ants have the largest non-discriminatory system in the natural world. I call it the European Union of ants. There's an invasive population of ants from Argentina to Europe, and they have like a passport. They can just go from northern Spain to Portugal to southern Spain to France to Italy, just kind of visiting ant beehives. I mean, how does a company build such a large structure where they can all work together and visit different locations of offices? I mean, there's so many problems that leaders have today that have already been solved if only we take a moment to look at the natural world to ask those questions. solutions. That's really where I like to provide insight and inspiration and empowerment.
That's amazing as well. Wow. So many, like I said, so many cool facets to what you're talking about and to what you do. So amazing. And again, thank you for pointing all of this out and for being a voice and for being so passionate about helping people and helping the planet, because we need people like you in order to remind us that we have some responsibility to take and we can actually take action to make change. So
Yeah,
again,
thanks, Chris.
I wish you the best. April, I know it's probably an important month for you to get the word out. And hopefully, like I said, this Earth Day will be one that sees a lot of people taking part and taking on some new responsibilities and ideas that they can champion.
Absolutely. Yeah, Chris, thank you so much. This month we'll have a couple papers out, including our Bees in Space paper. So, just again, all these ways for inspiration and people to understand that this world is amazing and that we've got to take a moment to see our place in it and then to figure out how we can do our best. So, thanks again, Chris. It's been great talking to you.
Absolutely. You too, my friend. It's been really wonderful. And thanks again for everything you do. And I will talk to you soon, my friend.
All right, be well.
You too. Take care.